One of the very first episodes we ever aired featured the author of a book, China RX. You want to talk about a horror book? This is frightening. It's not a novel. It's not fiction. It's real life. And the author is Rosemary Gibson. She's an intense researcher with a passion for truth and America. She's become a family-friendly and leading voice in protecting America's health. She's the author of the great book, China RX. It warns about how China has literally taken over our pharmaceutical industry. This is a part of unrestricted warfare. This is the art of war. I saw her at a conference in Florida recently, and I heard what she had to say about generic drugs and the findings of multiple studies. And I knew we had to get her back to the economic war room. So, Rosemary Gibson, welcome back to the economic war room.
Kevin, it is absolutely great to be with you again. Been too long, but now we've got some solutions working and we can talk about that.
That's awesome. Well, we've known each other and worked together for, various coalitions, at least a half dozen years. I'm a big admirer of your work. And, you know, it is unimpeachable. It's the kind of thing that somebody would argue with and then read the book and they come back and say, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. Before we start, how can people follow your work? Where do they get information about China RX and the other work that you're doing since that?
The best place to find out what I'm up to lately is on X, and it's at Rosemary 100. I post new material coming out about some of the problems with our generic drugs, some policy steps that are being taken. And China RX is available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I just want everybody to know that I did this work in the public interest, and we donate all the proceeds to noble causes. So we're all in this together.
Well, I so appreciate what you're doing. You have been exposing real gaps in our healthcare. You know, we depend so much on the pharmaceutical industry, but in many ways, that's vulnerable. And you describe all of those, and it can be life or death. Would you please recap your early work and where it's taken you? For example, my eyes opened when you talked about heparin. Describe that early finding and how it got you to your current understanding.
Kevin, China RX starts out with a story that I exposed in the book, and it dates back to when the United States began to first outsource production of our medicines to other countries in Asia, including China as well as India. And what was so shocking to me that we started this as a country, and U.S. companies did this in the early 2000s. So China opens up with a story of a Johns Hopkins trained physician who walked into the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona, late one night. He self-diagnosed him with a common problem, but it was causing him some discomfort. So they said, why don't you stay with us tonight? We'll work you up in the morning, and then you can go home tomorrow. And within 24 hours, Dr. Bob Allen was in multiple organ failure. This was a healthy gentleman in his mid-40s. He had just been hiking in the Arizona hills the week before with his son. And here he was in multiple organ failure, had to have his heart taken out, and he was put on an artificial heart machine within a week later. And 3 months later, they tried a Hail Mary double organ transplant, which failed miserably, and he died a horrific death. And that was Let's put a human face on the fact of what happens when we outsource production to countries that doesn't have the full regulatory, doesn't follow our rules, didn't have our rules at that time. This was in the late 2000s, early 2007 and 8. China's gotten better to some degree, but they have zero respect for FDA and its regulations. And we are at risk as a country.
What caused that organ failure? How did that happen? I mean, you described it, and then he's got this serious problem, but what was the intervening step?
Oh, sure. What was happening at the time, Kevin, is that he was watching TV while he was in the hospital room at the Mayo Clinic, and he saw that there was a contaminated heparin found at a children's hospital in the Midwest in St. Louis. And he turned to his wife and said, oh my God, I got a lot of heparin. Was it contaminated? This is a commonly used blood thinner throughout every hospital in the United States and dialysis unit. And FDA traced contaminated heparin back to a plant in China. And they came up with a fake substitute for the real ingredient in it. And it turns out it was catastrophic, causing deaths to unknown numbers of people. here and elsewhere.
And the medical community couldn't explain, why did he die? Why did this child die? Why did this elderly person die? Why did this healthy 40-year-old die? And then you trace it all back. It's a bad drug that was manufactured in China because they violated the standards. But doesn't the FDA go into China and check on these things?
Well, Congress gave money to FDA to do that, to try to do that. And there was some progress made. But right now, Kevin, where we are is that China does not respect the FDA and our regulatory authority to protect the American people. The FDA commissioner was telling Capitol Hill 2 years ago, the old FDA commissioner, Dr. Califf, he said China's been blocking FDA from going into that country to inspect manufacturing plants. It doesn't provide information for the FDA to review if whether what plants are doing or what they should be doing. And finally, the icing on the cake was the anti-espionage law that China instituted a couple of years ago, which means anybody traveling to China, you're at risk of detainment under some guise of, you're taking state secrets out of the country. So regulators in Europe, and I'm sure here, don't want to travel there. Do you want to be the sole federal employee that goes into a huge manufacturing plant, writes up a bad report? You want to get home. You want to get back on that plane back to the U.S. So it's creating an environment where we cannot perform our regulatory functions. And I've seen in the past 5 years, Kevin, since China RX came out, supply chains become much more fragile. And I believe the quality problems are escalating. And we got to get to it now, to intervene now, to stop the real onslaught that will happen, in the next 5 years.
Well, I certainly don't blame an FDA inspector. You don't sign up for the idea that you'll go to a hostile foreign country and they'll arrest you because you're just telling the truth. But what percentage? I mean, is this a tiny percentage of our pharmaceutical industry, or is it something that's dramatic and impacting a lot of drugs?
Well, in terms of overall quality of our generics, the Department of Defense, I'm really happy to say, started a generic drug testing program. They realized that the FDA doesn't test. It just doesn't do that. And early findings from the first batch of 6 different drugs, the defect rate, manufacturing defect rate, was 13.4%. If you have that defect rate in making cars or airplanes or anything else that's really important, even electric lamps, it could, turn into a fire in your house. That's totally unacceptable. So we've got to start testing, expand the testing, put the data out there, and only buy a quality, and also from trustworthy countries that respect our laws and regulations.
Taking a break, we'll be right back. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government, and freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended by each generation.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
In this most critical time in our nation's history, now more than ever, Americans need to align with companies that support our constitutional rights and God-given freedoms. Patriot Mobile supports your values and provides exceptional 100% U.S.-based customer service. Join the movement today. Go to patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're speaking with Rosemary Gibson. She's the author of China RX. She's, I think, the world's leading expert on the risks to our pharmaceutical industry from outsourcing to other nations, sometimes hostile, sometimes just, well, I don't know, maybe greedy, but other countries that aren't following the same standards that we would expect of drugs that are manufactured here in America. And she just shared a shocking statistics, over 13% of drugs tested in one study that had contamination or something wrong with the drug. How many of our drugs, Rosemary, are actually manufactured or portions manufactured overseas? What percentage?
Kevin, the percentage of finished drugs, the pills that we take, they're largely coming from India. It's a huge number. Where China is, there's not so much on the pills we take, but they account for 90% of all these key starting materials, key ingredients that are necessary for the virtually entire supply chain. So if you go into a hospital or pharmacy to pick up your meds, look at that and all the generics, 95% of those generic drugs depend at least on something in them coming from China. And if China shut the door on our exports within months, our hospitals would cease to function and our pharmacies would be pretty empty.
And that's assuming that they're quality drugs, that they're well made, that they have no contamination. That's a threat. The contamination is another threat. What was the impact of COVID and this worldwide pandemic on drug production?
Well, I think it showed that globalization doesn't work in a pandemic. Globalization whereby you rely on other countries to supply you with what you need. In this case, it was PPE, although we could have set up factories here pretty quick. But a lot of our money went to China, and they made a lot of money off of us in other places. But a lot of drugs, we had huge shortages. We were rationing medicines in the United States of America, and in part, that's because we offshored the things that are most vital to care for people who had severe respiratory illness.
So now we're in a trade war. What does that impact? I mean, that's just layering on top of the whole issue of COVID and the pandemic.
Well, we're waiting to see what, if any, pharmaceutical tariffs will be imposed. President Trump said about 10 days ago that they should be coming out, or information coming out about that around now. But, I think this is part of a much bigger pattern, Kevin. We look at what's happened with illegal fentanyl. So China takes a legitimate drug and plays around with the chemicals and puts it on the black market. And we have tens of thousands of Americans that die every year. Just recently, I think it was last week, Secretary Kennedy was talking about vaping materials and how China has put loads of chemicals in them that change the hormones of young people in this country. So everything is weaponized. They're growing marijuana in the United States on U.S. land, and they're putting all kinds of things into it, and they're spraying pesticides on them that have neurotoxic chemicals in them that could cause huge harm. So this is part of getting in the chemical industry, which our drugs are. They're basically chemicals. You can do a lot of damage. And when it comes to our prescription drugs, you may not even know it. And that's why I've encouraged from years ago, and I'm glad the Department of Defense has started a generic drug testing program. We've got to start testing these things across the board. And the DOD, by the way, also supplies, this is public information, supplies the White House pharmacy, the crash cart, the ambulance that goes with the president. We have to fix it.
Well, especially, we just saw with President Biden that, he has cancer. And while he was president, it didn't come on in the last 3 months. It's while he was president that this was developing. And you stop and you think about the critical national security aspect of supplying our soldiers, supplying our president and political figures and so forth. Tell us more about the test and the testing done by the Department of Defense on generic drugs, because a lot of people that watch this program take these generic drugs or have parents or grandparents or children who take them. And then we see all the tumult with United Healthcare where they're pushing to lower prices and everything and maybe illegally doing some of that. What did they find when the Department of Defense did this review?
Well, there's been a slow release of the first handful of generic drugs tested. And what they do is they test everything. They'll test, in this case, 6 different generic drugs. And as many of your viewers and listeners will know, for each generic, there's lots of different manufacturers or repackagers. And so the testing program has tested every single one of those, everything that's on the market. And they test multiple samples from different batches for each drug. So they have big sample size. And they want to see, President Kennedy back in 1962 signed a law saying our drugs should be pure. They should work as they should. And it turns out a number of our generics, too many of them have impurities in them, carcinogens and lead at levels that just shouldn't be there. And then you've got products that just aren't manufactured right, so they don't work right in the body. They don't dissolve right, so you're not getting the protection that you need. That's the part that we should really, really, really be concerned about. And a couple of those drugs tested are very important for people with, in some cases, serious illness. So we've got to produce this data, then we have to use it. I'm really happy to say Kaiser Health Plan, some of your folks might be members of Kaiser Health Plan, they started generic drug testing even before the DOD. They did that for a reason. And so now, I have a lot of people coming up after our meeting in Florida saying, well, how can we get access? And this information has to be handled very carefully and judiciously, but we first want to get the DOD to use it to inform what it does and what it purchases, and then expand it. We want to get other big health systems in. If anybody's listening who's on the board of a big hospital system, let's find a way that we can augment the use of this information to inform purchasing decisions and get to millions and millions of people.
Well, you stop and you think about it. I had a dear friend who was taking thyroid medication, and they found out that in some cases, certain batches had too much medication. In other cases, they had too little, and it's like not taking anything at all. I mean, we depend on this, and the entire medical industry, which is a huge portion of our economy, depends on these pharmaceuticals to be accurate. And if they're not, they'll throw all kinds of health problems into our society, which will cost us trillions of dollars if we don't get this right. So we're speaking with Rosemary Gibson. We're talking about findings from her original book, China RX, which showed that outsourcing drug manufacturing is not necessarily good for the health, safety, and welfare or the finances of Americans. And now we're talking about this new drug testing program by the Department of Defense and others that's finding generic medicine, supposed to be the economic solution for the high cost of drugs, that has problems, but these are fixable problems. Rosemary, I want you to stay over for one more segment, and I want to dive into some solutions. How do we fix this? How do we make certain that the drugs that you're taking do what they're intended to take at a fair price and help make America healthier and not cause greater problems and cost society so much more? We'll be right back with Rosemary Gibson right after this break. Here's a $10 bill. It's got the picture of Alexander Hamilton on the front of it. It's kind of sad. When I was 10 years old, everything that I could buy for $1 now costs about $10. That's the cost of inflation. It's just paper. It's not backed by anything. You can't exchange it for gold and silver. You used to, but you can't do that anymore. And that's unfortunate. Pirates wouldn't accept this. Pirates, they wanted gold and silver. Patriots, the founders of this nation, also wanted gold and silver coin. In fact, they put a provision in the Constitution, 17 words, that said states could only make gold and silver coins tender within the states. That's why I wrote this new book, Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. It will explain exactly the history of money and exactly why gold and silver coins can be made modern with new technology and a useful monetary system. PirateMoneyBook.com.
I'm Kevin Sorbo. When you spend money, you consider who you're buying from and the causes they support. If you don't, then you're likely supporting companies that are trying to destroy our country and take away our freedoms. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They're a cell phone company and a good one. They offer nationwide coverage on the best 4G and 5G networks along with 100% US-based customer support. But here's the deal. Patriot Mobile's mission has nothing to do with cell phones. They carry out their mission by giving back millions of dollars every year to Christian conservative causes that are actively engaged in the fight to save America. Voting is no longer enough to beat the woke. We have to band together, support like-minded companies, and vote with our dollars. That's how we win. Stop supporting companies that want to destroy America and join Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're speaking with a dear friend, but she is also the world's leading expert, in my opinion, on the issue of overseas production of pharmaceuticals and the risks that that poses, both to our economy, but also to our society, both in national security. Imagine if our soldiers were subject to an anthrax attack and then the drugs that they were taking weren't available because they're made in China, or maybe they were tainted in some way. I mean, this is a serious, serious issue. And Rosemary, we've been talking about all of the problems. What are some of the solutions we could bring?
Well, first, Kevin, as I mentioned, I think we have to expand this independent testing program and have big buyers, big health plans use it to inform their purchasing decisions. What they found in the testing, there are a lot of companies that their products score well. And by the way, some of the lower quality generics that you may not want to buy, they actually cost more than the good ones. So this may not be a cost issue because we have no transparency. People can't make informed decisions. So let's have independent testing. Number one, have the DoD use this data. What about the VA? The VA should be using it. Department of Health and Human Services. They purchase a lot of drugs for the Strategic National Stockpile. They should all be tested to ensure we have quality product. Increase the number of private health systems that want to use this information to inform their purchasing decisions. And what we're doing is sending a signal to the marketplace that we're not going to tolerate this stuff anymore. Now, relatedly, we can point the finger at other countries. We can point at China, at India, even elsewhere. And even here, some companies have problems. But we need this market discipline with information in the market to say, we don't want to do this anymore. But it's, who it is, really, Kevin? There are 6 U.S. companies that source 90% of all the generic drugs that get into the U.S. supply chain. And that crowd needs to hear this message. Why are you buying from countries that don't respect our regulations, that we're testing them and they don't have good quality? I really appreciate how Secretary Kennedy is part of MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. He got together the food company CEOs and said, you guys got to get these ingredients out that shouldn't be in there. I would love to see a meeting of Secretary Kennedy and even some White House folks, because this is not just HHS, with the CEOs of these 6 companies and say, what are you doing? Why are you selling transplant medicines for people with heart failure that are not manufactured right? And you can't hide behind the skirts of the FDA anymore. You have to take responsibility for the quality of the products that you put in the supply chain in the United States. To me, the buck stops there. And will we have the guts, though, to hold these people accountable? We've got to start that conversation.
Well, we have a lot of incredible viewers of Economic War Room, some placed highly in the government. So if you're one of those and you see this, contact Rosemary Gibson and tell her, let's do that. Let's pull this summit together. It could be under HHS Secretary Kennedy and in cooperation with Dr. McCary at the FDA and so forth. This is a great idea. Here's another question. What if we're not one of those government officials, but we are someone who takes or has a family member who takes? Is there a way to protect ourselves to benefit from the knowledge that you've gained?
Sure. Ken, what I suggest to everybody listening is that if you're on a generic and you're doing well and your doctor says you're doing well, then you're good. Sounds like you're good to go for the most part. Now, what happens often to a lot of people is you may go in to get your pharmacy, get your drug, but it's changed. Different manufacturer, maybe a different color. Same drug, but different seller. If you don't feel like your body's responding the same way, which a lot of people understand this, they see it. Those who are compliant, they say, well, just something's not right about it. Go back to your doctor and see if you can get, a lot of people can't afford it, but the brand drug might be better. And I have no financial interest in any of that. And also go back to your pharmacy or go to a different pharmacy because some of them have different generic producers or sellers that they have. See if you can go back to the original one that you were on doing well. And also, if you store your generic drugs in your medicine chest in your bathroom with a shower, you don't want to do that. It has humidity. It will degrade the drug. Get it out. Put it on your kitchen countertop where the humidity and temperature is controlled. Don't put your meds in your car, in your purse when it gets really hot. And also, there is a problem with mail order when you have your drugs delivered and they're sitting in your mailbox in 110 degrees or, 20 degrees. These really do need to be temperature controlled. I know a lot of folks don't have control over that, but it's just something to consider.
Well, it seems like perfect common sense. And basically your message is, look, we depend on these drugs. Generic drugs, by definition, are supposed to be identical. That's what the doctors always told me. That's what the pharmacists have always told me. Oh, it's identical. It's just a little bit cheaper because it went off patent. Okay, maybe not. Maybe they're not identical. Maybe they're made overseas and they're an actual threat. Maybe they just don't work. Or maybe they do work. The question is, how do we find out? And you're leading the charge to demanding our government. Is this a possible thing? Can we really test all these generic drugs and get the answers? Or is that just kind of a pipe dream?
I know folks that get tires from Costco. And can you imagine if Costco were buying tires from sources and there was a defect rate of 13.4% and these tires could blow out when you're on the Capitol Beltway in Washington, D.C. or the Long Island Expressway in New York? That would be a game changer. We have to bring accountability into the private sector because it's the private sector sourcing this stuff and selling it to the American people. And let's use that leverage to change the marketplace.
Well, there's no question that this matters to individual people. They've just never been gathered. They've never had a point of gathering. I think you, Rosemary Gibson, are the point of gathering. So first, everyone needs to read China RX. That will open your eyes. And then you need to follow Rosemary. It's Rosemary 100 on X. Is that the?
Yes. Yes, at Rosemary 100.
Follow Rosemary. Add to this because that becomes our gathering point where we can say, look, on my health, my family's health, it matters too much. Our national security matters too much. We can't let this continue to where we're at risk because we're sloppy or lazy or just don't have the time to look at this. This is a life or death and economic and national security issue. And Rosemary, thank you so much because you have been leading the charge on this.
Well, Kevin, it's an honor to do it. If you see something, you got to say something. We did that in China RX, but we also have to do something. And this is a bipartisan issue. Democrats or Republicans, they all go to Walter Reed Hospital if they need to. And that's being supplied from the same way where the DOD and the president are getting their meds from. So let's see if we can work together. It's fixable. But we have to take on some big special interests that love things the way they are. The status quo is not good for our country or for any of us.
Well, thank you so much, Rosemary Gibson. We're going to summarize all this in our free economic battle plan. You can get a copy at economicwarroom.com. It's free. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.